In the 17th century, a redistribution of political power was required to protect the newly rich of the British Isles, who had grown wealthy during the expansion of the British colonies. This new elite were Freemasons, who gave England the Glorious Revolution of 1688. British journalist Stephen Knight documents in his book, The Brotherhood, that after the rebellion, English Freemasonry was involved in every walk of life. Affiliation with the lodge was a prerequisite for anyone, including the king, who wanted to achieve prominence and influence. Knight's most significant point is that from that day until now, English Freemasonry has been deeply involved in British politics. Oliver Cromwell, English soldier and statesman, was Lord Protector of the Republican Commonwealth of England, Scotland, and Ireland from 1653 to 1658. As you will now see, Cromwell, as were many English Protestants, was a Rosicrucian Mason. Part 1. Cromwell and Rosicrucian Freemasonry. While the invisible arm guiding Cromwell was Rosicrucian Masonry, he, as a former Unitarian-turned-Puritan, was a recognized Protestant, making his rebellion in England look like a Protestant movement. Yet a careful study of Unitarianism will reveal that its religious dogma is identical to dynastic Freemasonry. In fact, Oliver Cromwell was first and foremost a Mason, as were many of the Puritans. His Masonic affiliation was confirmed years later by French Freemasons, whose ceremonies originated with the Templars he ousted. Frenchmen claimed Cromwell was a high initiate of Masonic mysteries, and used the system for his own elevation to power. Abbé Leroudan, a Catholic expert on Masonry from Amsterdam, in his book, The Freemasons Crushed, claims that Oliver Cromwell established the Order of Freemasonry for the furtherance of his own political designs, and that Freemasonry was organized, its degrees established, and its ceremonies and ritual prescribed by Cromwell and several of the adherents he initiated. Leroudan further alleges that the institution was used by Cromwell for the advancement of his projects, for the union of the contending parties in England, for the extirpation of the monarchy, and his own subsequent elevation to supreme power. Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry attempts to discredit Leroudan. Leroudan writes with seeming fairness and mildness. But it is hardly necessary to say that this theory of the origin of Freemasonry finds no support either in the legends of the institution, or in the authentic history that is connected with its rise and progress. However, another Masonic publication, History and Evolution of Freemasonry, affirms Cromwell's link to Masonry. Cromwell regularly met at the Masonic lodge in the tavern called Crown. This was a lodge for the aristocratic Rosicrucian gentry, the new elite who were the newly rich. Cromwell was supposed by many to be a Rosicrucian himself, since he was on the best of terms with them. This view is also endorsed by the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. During Cromwell's day, Masonry in England was not yet united. Each lodge operated independently. Some backed Cromwell, while others supported the Stuarts. Cromwell gained control of the government because his Masonic sect was more powerful. Less than a decade after Cromwell's protectorate began in 1653, an opposition Masonic sect, the Levellers, whose symbol were the square and compass, supported the Royalists and shifted the balance of power back to the dethroned Stuart kings. English lodges by the end of the 17th century were once again Royalist. On the surface, embryonic Masonry seems to have consisted of several splintered factions trying to wrest power from each other, when in fact their conflicts were a continuation of the division between the Knights Templar and Zion's Rosicrucians. The Masonry to which Cromwell belonged was Rosicrucian. Stuart Freemasonry, known as Jacobite Freemasonry after 1688, and later as Scottish Rite Freemasonry on the continent, was of Templar origin, harkening back to Jacques de Molay. Part 2. Cromwell and the Jews. When Cromwell had dethroned the Stuart monarchy, he dissolved all Crown-protected monopolies, including the British East India Company. For 3 years the British East India Company ceased to exist as a chartered corporation. In October 1657, however, short of capital for his new government, Cromwell granted the British East India Company a new charter in return for financial aid. British East India Company stockholders rushed to join Cromwell's new ascendant Masonic Lodge. Jews of Amsterdam also helped to finance Cromwell's government. As the most persecuted and destitute of all people, they would buy their freedom if necessary. The Jews bankrolled Cromwell's revolution when he guaranteed relief from persecution. Cromwell in return promised them that Masonry would one day rebuild Solomon's Temple. Monsignor Dr. George E. Dillon, in Freemasonry Unmasked, writes, "The building of the Temple of Solomon was the dream of their lives. It is unquestionable that they wished to make common cause with other bodies of persecuted religionists. They had special reason to welcome with joy such heretics as were cast off by Catholicity. It is therefore, not at all improbable, that they admitted into their secret conclaves some at least of the discontented, burning for revenge upon those who dispossessed and suppressed them." Some Jews also looked to Cromwell as a possible messiah. Durant's remark, "To the Jews so dispersed, and so often destitute and maligned, the prop of life was the faith that someday soon the real Messiah would come to raise them out of misery and ignominy to power and glory." Nestor Webster confirms, "Now, just at this period of Messianic era was generally believed by the Jews to be approaching, and it appears to have occurred to them that Cromwell might be fitted to the part. Consequently, emissaries were dispatched to search the archives of Cambridge in order to discover whether the Protector could possibly be of Jewish descent. This quest proving fruitless, the Kabbalist rabbi of Amsterdam, Manasseh ben Israel, addressed a petition to Cromwell for the readmission of the Jews to England. Cromwell did win partial emancipation for his Jewish friends, but not without opposition. The Anabaptists, a radical Protestant sect that advocated rebaptism for church membership and promoted separation of church and state, denounced Cromwell as the beast of the apocalypse because of the messianic way in which he presented himself to the Jews. Edith Starr Miller, in Occult Theocracy, tells us of the disaster which later renewed anti-Jewish sentiment in England. After the death of Charles I, Cromwell appointed an assembly of lawyers and divines to consider the petition of Manasseh ben Israel, demanding the abolition of the legal exclusion of the Jews from England. In December 1655 the legal prohibition was removed. 11 years after occurred the Great Fire of London. The commercial centre of the city was almost wiped out, but Westminster, the political heart of the city, was saved. Altogether 2/3 of London was destroyed. Of course, the fire was blamed on the Jews, but there was no proof to substantiate the charge. Not satisfied with Cromwell's partial success in winning them freedom, the Jews financially backed the Stuart cause to regain the British throne for Templar Freemasonry. The Jews anticipated that the Stuarts would give them full emancipation for their financial services. Jews also turned Elias Ashmole, who had been inducted into Rosicrucianism in 1646, and through him turned the Rosicrucian Masonic system against Cromwell, so that towards the end of the 17th century that order was rallied to the Stuart cause. Without Jewish financial support, Cromwell's government faltered and collapsed, plunging the nation into depression. The British began calling for the return of the Stuarts, in hopes that a change of administration would better their desperate condition. To avoid another civil war, the Rosicrucians permitted the Stuart Templar king, Charles II, to reclaim the throne of England 11 years after his father